If you're looking for a magical night out in Chicago, then you got to head over to Teatro Zinzanni. It's more than just dinner and a show. It's comedy, music, acrobatics, it's cirque, all under an intimate tent atop the Cambria Hotel in the Loop. Trust me, I pulled up on them. They have some powerhouse singers. The acrobatics is out of this world. And if you sit close enough, you might find yourself a part of the show that evening. And you can use code CityCast for $20 off tickets through February 28th at zinzanni.com/Chicago. One of my favorite times of the year is almost back, Chicago Theater Week. Enjoy value price tickets to an array of productions from February 5th through the 15th. For $30, $15, and in some cases even less, you can enjoy great shows across Chicago's dynamic theater scene. Productions range from comedies and dramas to musical and improv shows, so trust me, there is something for everyone. Brought to you by the League of Chicago Theaters in partnership with Choose Chicago, Chicago Theater Week has been bringing audiences together for 14 years. Visit chicagotheaterweek.com for more information on shows and to buy your tickets today. Today on CityCast Chicago, every city has its local terminology with its unknown origins. Like, is it tavern style or thin crust? The bean or cloud gate, gym shoes or sneakers? And what the hell is a slashy? So today, we talking about all things Chicago slang. It's Tuesday, January 20th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. I am joined by executive producer Simone Alicea.
Hey, Jacoby.
We've also got social media manager Rick Homuth in the building.
Pleasure to be here.
Rick, so much of this conversation started with a video that you recently put out about slashies. And to be honest, I had never heard of this term. I have since looked it up and read a lot. But can you remind listeners what exactly is a slashie? And did you expect this video to not only blow up, but to spark so much debate in the comments?
I did expect it to blow up because if there's one thing you can always count on, it's people in Chicago or out of Chicago specifically to have something to say about the rules of this city, so to speak. The slashie is an interesting case because it is relatively new. I think in some of the reporting that I read, shout out Maggie Hennessy, who had a great piece, I think in Eater maybe a few years ago, that the first known mention of slashie is in like 2006. And a slashie is a tavern / packaged goods store. And those two terms, tavern and packaged goods, are used because they are used in the language of the permit that you get through the city, right? You can have a tavern license or you can have a packaged good license. A tavern is obviously a bar and a packaged goods store is a liquor store. And in fact, you can still see that sign on the old style cantilevers around town too. That's also not something I just made up for some of you people out there accusing me of just making things up. But that is where the slash enters into it, as a tavern / packaged goods store. And yes, I admit it is a relatively recent thing that not a lot of people in Chicago use day to day, but it is real.
No, I've come to, this is much more familiar territory since we started this podcast. Because again, when we were having a whole conversation about what pizza is Chicago pizza, I started seeing the word tavern style pop up. And again, these are not words that I used growing up. I've been to a liquor store that got a bar in it, Maria's. But I've also, since you put this video out, kind of learned that this is one of those businesses in Chicago, a lot more common when I was growing up, but has been harder to maintain in the last few years. Places like Crown Liquor in Avondale have closed, Fishman in Jefferson Park, but there are some legendary spots still around.
Well, I think it's also important that this type of business is also unique to Chicago. Not every city really has a liquor store where you can then go sit down and buy a shot. That's actually kind of unusual. Right. And it that type of license, as you say in the video, Rick, is now much harder to get. It's interesting because, Rick, you pitched the video and you're like, I want to do a video about slashies. And I think I said, I was like, what's a slashie? And I was like, I've never heard this, and I'm the person of the three of us who has been in Chicago the least amount of time. I come from the farthest away. And so it was interesting when you were sort of like, oh yeah, this is kind of one of these like new millennial transplant terms for what this is. And I was like, I was actually kind of flattered that I didn't know what it was. It made me feel like I'd arrived in Chicago, that like I didn't understand what this like, this new nonsense was.
I assumed it was an Italian ice with some tequila in it. I was just like, all right, that's
Ooh.
I could see that on the menu and order that.
Let's start that next.
I mean, as you were kind of filtering through the comments, you said earlier, you expect there to be debate, people saying they've never heard of this is a transplant word, or people saying, no, this has been around for a bit. What do you think is that instinct about Chicago that, this isn't the only example of we don't like to call things by their, government name. It's like, it's the name we remember, right? The name you had. We don't really love change. We are so segregated that there are words that exist in parts of the city that other parts have never heard of, have never used, or one part of the city is absolutely using it incorrectly. What do you think sort of drives this kind of tribalism around language?
Well, I think people locally are obviously very proud to live here, but I think so much of this conversation is driven online, due in no small part, frankly, due to people like us who get on, podcasts and qualify for a wider audience the things that locals more or less take for granted, akin to the proverbial fish swimming in water or whatever, right? So, there's no need to describe Chicago's square cut thin crust pizza as tavern style unless you're contrasting it to a different style of pizza and say like New Haven or the Quad Cities or whatever. And obviously these conversations happen well before social media, but not on the same scale. And just to put a pin on this, I think a lot of people who have skin in this game are Chicagoans who maybe don't live in the city anymore and have moved to Scottsdale or whatever and still feel the need to flex their bona fides. And the only way they can do that is by arguing in my
I don't know, Rick. I have opinions about this in a couple different ways. Number one, I think it's funny when we say that people were fighting in our comments, like I'm talking hundreds of comments and on both sides of this fight. You had lots of people who are like, this guy's not a real Chicagoan. This guy doesn't know anything. No one says slashy. Like, this is not real. And then you had...
Yeah, but by the way, feel free to DM me your address and then we'll talk. How about that?
But there were like almost as many people who were like, no, I've absolutely heard this. What are you talking about? Like, this is absolutely a thing. And like really kind of going back and forth. There was, I'm glad this was online and not in real life, I guess. But here's the thing. A lot of people brought up this comparison that both of you have already brought up, which is like tavern style pizza to refer to a thin crust pizza that is square cut, often sort of offered as like the opposite of deep dish pizza, right? Which everyone kind of knows is a Chicago thing. And it's like, well, Chicago's version of thin crust pizza is this tavern style pizza. I got to say, I didn't know tavern style like was not a real thing that Chicagoans said when I first got here. For me, it was a helpful distinction because there are lots of places that serve New York style thin crust pizza. Or other styles of like it's not just like we're differentiating it for people outside of Chicago. It's just like, oh, what kind of pizza does this restaurant serve? Well, does it serve Chicago thin crust? When I say thin crust pizza, am I going to expect a square cut and a cracker crust, or am I expecting a wedge and kind of a chewy crust? Like, that's an important question when I'm going out to decide what kind of pizza. Whereas I feel like slashy does nothing. I think slashy is a term that is not useful.
You're not convinced of the utility.
I don't
of
think it offers anything. When we were talking about this among the CityCast Chicago team, someone offered the term liquor store bar, which I think is vastly superior because I think it more describes what I'm expecting when I walk into one of these establishments.
Yeah. Well, let me make one thing clear. I'm not.
I know you're not. I know you're just reporting the news. You're not. There's no opinion.
That's just doing my job, Simone. All right. But I do think slashy is kind of a corny, phrase for that sort of thing. And frankly, a liquor store bar, LSB, we could say, is a lot more effective.
LSB is pretty good. Once again, I like that.
Yeah, we could use that.
I like the gritty feel of most of like as I was looking them up around the city, like the purpose they've served, like the pictures you'll find, looks like people who are just like getting off of work. I wonder does this term, whether we advocate for it or not, like the increasing number of wine shops around Chicago. There's one up the street from me where you can go, you could drink wine. You can also pick up a bottle or a case. Does that fit in this definition as well? Or does this term cover those as well?
I mean, I think technically speaking, yes. And I think one of the, qualifications that needs to be made about the tavern / packaged good license is I think a lot of them, maybe even most of them, are held by craft beer brew pubs, which I don't think any of us picture in our mind when we think of like what we're describing. So yeah, there's plenty of qualification to be had.
The most Tony Award nominated play of all time is in Chicago for 2 weeks only, and you've got to check out the legendary Stereophonic. Stereophonic tells the story of an up-and-coming 70s rock band as they record a new album, finding themselves suddenly on the cusp of superstardom. Will the ensuing pressure spark their breakup or their breakthrough? With the original music from Arcade Fire's Will Butler, catch Stereophonic from January 27th to February 8th at the CIBC Theater. And for more information, visit BroadwayInChicago.com. Chicago knows how to kick off a new year, and that's with great food. That's right, Chicago Restaurant Week is back from January 23rd through February 8th. The 19th annual event produced by Choose Chicago features prefix menus. I'm talking $30 for lunch and brunch, $45 and $60 for dinner at more than 500 restaurants across the city. You can use the website to see the full list or filter by cuisine type or use the map feature. But pro tip, make your reservations as soon as possible because they go quick. Explore participating restaurants and menus at ChicagoRestaurantWeek.com and book your tables now. That's a category of like terms that I am not often using. But then you have this other category where, we are calling something by a name it had 10, 15, 20 years ago. And we are committed to holding on to it. I don't even know if it's the legacy in some of these cases. It's just the familiarity.
Yeah, we're committed to calling it by the thing that it isn't. I don't know what it is. I mean, like, this is like, Jacoby, I really wanted to talk about this because we at CityCast Chicago have developed a style for some of these things in Chicago where, like, and by which I mean any of you writers or journalists out there know, it's like you have to develop a style guide of like, okay, always capitalize this because that's always the way you refer to it, right? And so for things like Willis Tower, which we almost never say on the podcast.
We'll never say.
Yeah, pretty much never. We can pretty much, our style is on the podcast to say Sears Tower on first reference and to say Willis Tower with a little bit of stank. Because it's just no one calls it that. And if we called it that, people would accuse us of not being from here. They would accuse us of like not being real Chicagoans, despite the fact that like, in news, normally there's sort of a bias to like call things by its a given official full title and name, and it would actually undermine our credibility to do so in this work, which I think is really funny.
I think we have a lot more room when it comes to like what people call Sox Park. It's gone through a few iterations, and I know a bunch of people who still call it Comiskey. Some people still throw the old or the new in front of it. Some people I think more people are accepting of rate field than they ever were of like guaranteed rate. I think some people still call it the sale, but I know a lot of people who hated U.S. Sailor when it became that. And so I think because it has gone through so many more changes than like Sears Tower, it depends who you talk to on how comfortable they are with any given name. There's some flexibility on that one.
It's also one that like what people call it, you can tell when they arrived to Chicago. Like I think like the Willis Tower, Sears Tower one is like you learn pretty quick that you call it the Sears Tower. Like that gets it doesn't take long for you to live here before like that's a thing. But like, and by the way, our CityCast Chicago style is to call it Sox Park on first reference in most cases. If in case anyone was curious, but yeah, we will occasionally.
We never say Cubs Park.
We will never say no because it's Wrigley Field.
Doesn't even roll off the tongue.
And I mean, because it's always been Wrigley Field, and the neighborhood is Wrigley. It's Wrigleyville. Like, it's sort of never going to thing. We will occasionally say rate field, but we almost never did. We never said guaranteed rate, and we only say Comiskey to refer to the old Comiskey Stadium. We don't use it to refer to the current Sox Stadium.
I interchange between Comiskey, Sale, and Sox Park. So those are probably the three I'm most likely to utter. But again, that's one I don't like. If somebody says Willis Tower, like I can feel like judgment in my mind. I almost never feel, even if someone were to call it like rate or guarantee when it was, the judgment on that one wasn't as strong.
This one I think is interesting, Jacoby, because you're actually pro Cloudgate. You like to say Cloudgate, as I recall.
Yeah, I mean, this is about to celebrate 20 years since it was officially dedicated in May of 2006. And while I use the Bean often and can't really remember when I first heard of the Bean, like 2006, I would have been, maybe a freshman or a freshman in high school. So I wasn't really paying attention to it. So I can only really remember ever coming to know it as the Bean and then choosing, once I found out it was called Cloudgate, to just be like, I like saying that more. I just like saying Cloudgate a lot more.
But
that's as good a reason as any.
That's my own. And I don't hate the name of the Bean. I just like Cloudgate. I just like saying that. And so I don't even like stand on any type of, people should call it this. I completely understand I'm in the minority on this, but.
Well, I think it functions differently day to day for Chicagoans, right? Because in theory, if you work downtown, you're like, oh, I have a meeting at Sears Tower or whatever. Like you would just say it naturally, or, oh, I'm getting together with my son and we're going to go taking a game at like Sox Park. You're never like, oh, I'll meet you at the Bean later. Like, oh yeah, we're my group gets together every week at Cloudgate. Like it just exists relative to tourists.
When we're there, I'm calling it Cloudgate because now it's right in front of us.
So that's interesting because if I'm like meeting someone at Millennium Park, let's say, because that's more likely to happen is I'm meeting someone at Millennium Park and they're asking where in Millennium Park, I'll be like, oh, by the Bean. Like, right. That would be the way I would never call it Cloudgate, Jacoby. Like I can't imagine a context. The only time I call it Cloudgate is when, and this happens frequently, is people ask me, what's the real name of that the Bean in Millennium Park, and I'm like, it's Cloudgate.
I also prefer to call a Sunday on La Grande Jatte a Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte by Georges Seurat. I like the full name, and so
respect.
That's it's a personal thing, but again, not something I have any particular allegiance to. If you're sitting in your crib uncomfortably cold, you might be thinking, I am sick of these old drafty windows. You love to get new ones and you imagine yourself warm and cozy even when the snow's coming down, but you don't really want to pay a fortune. Well, that's where Window Nation comes in. Their prices are always low, but right now, when you buy 4 windows, you get 4 more for free, and you might be able to do your whole house. Plus, you get them with 0 down, 0 monthly payments, and 0 interest for 2 years. And all the windows come with a lifetime warranty, so you know you'll have cozy Chicago winters for years to come. Don't wait. Schedule a fast free estimate now at windownation.com. Now, unlike some of these terms that maybe pop up from marketing purposes like tavern style or even slashy looking good in the headline, or these buildings or pieces of art that people have allegiances to particular names, I think Chicago slang is some of the most local, right, parts of the city. And this is really more about your favorite, like what Chicago lingo slang do you like? Listen, like, do you like hearing? Do you like using? I think the first place to drop in where we see a lot of kind of local individual naming is around neighborhoods. it's interesting when people talk about Chicago, they'll be like, Chicago has 77 community areas, which is true. But most people know that Chicago has like over 100 different individual neighborhoods and smaller pockets in the city. And what someone calls their neighborhood versus the way other people refer to it may say a lot about like where you grew up or where you live in the city or how long you've been here.
Yeah, can I do have beef with one of the community, I think it's a community area, or it's certainly on some official Chicago literature, and that is Lower West Side. Mostly that's Pilsen. Mostly, almost always, it's Pilsen. And like Pilsen is very well known. It's a very popular neighborhood that people like, not only of course that people live in, but of course that people like to hang out in and go to. Lots of venues and restaurants that like people are traveling to Pilsen fairly often. And every time I see some like Lower West Side on an official Chicago map or something, I'm like, can we put Pilsen on the map, please? Like, is it not time?
I think Douglas, for example, that is mostly Bronzeville. I don't think anybody that I've spoken to in the last decade has ever said, I live in Douglas, or you can meet me in Douglas. Same with like South Lawndale. That's not a community area you often hear. It's mostly people are saying they are in Little Village, for example. Little Village, Marshall Square.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are surprised when they hear that Bronzeville and Little Village are not community areas because, again, those are neighborhoods and again, these are neighborhoods I do think are relatively well known across the city. I have this debate in my neighborhood, actually, and so I live in Uptown, and that's what I say I live in Uptown, and Uptown does have a couple of like smaller neighborhoods within it.
Like Buena Park, Sheridan Park.
Yeah, Buena Park in particular. And I feel like I never use them and never hear other people say it. I have been told I'm wrong by other Northsiders. I have been told that is not the case, but I don't really encounter it in my day-to-day life of people using these. Like most people just say Uptown. Although I do often have to clarify that like I live on sort of the northern end of Uptown, almost in Edgewater. So I don't know.
Is that a homeowner thing? Do you think homeowners are more likely to use?
Oh, that's a good question.
Maybe in community areas in which the community area sort of dominates the overall naming. Like,
I know certainly if you're selling a home, it can make a difference on whether or not that home's in West Wicker Park versus Humboldt Park,
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true in a place like Uptown too, where there are some more affluent areas and there are some areas that are not as affluent within the community area itself, right? So I could absolutely seeing that being like a marketing thing.
Because I see in like West Town, you got obviously West Town, but Noble Square, Ukrainian Village, Wicker Park, East Village.
And it's funny how much each one is claimed, because I think like Ukrainian Village, for example, obviously because it has sort of that ethnic enclave and like, the church is still there, the museum is there, right? Like it still kind of has that identity a little bit. Whereas Noble Square, I get 50-50 on when I ask people if that's a real neighborhood. I kind of get people who are like, what are you talking about? It's just like part of Wicker Park or whatever. And other people who are like, no, I live in Noble Square. And I'm like, all right.
Well, I believe there's no official designation for neighborhood boundaries at all. Like the community areas, that is as legitimate as it gets. And anything else is just pure speculation. Like I think there's like a UIC definition. There's like a
University of Chicago
study.
Does have a map of neighborhoods. Because we use that in our this again, we're going behind the CityCast curtain here. We use that a lot when we're looking up like where something is and when we decide what we decide to call something. So if you go onto like the City of Chicago data portal, you can find a neighborhood map that is broken down by neighborhood, smaller neighborhoods than the community areas. But even that one, for example, still isn't totally like, I think definitive and doesn't necessarily jive with like what people are actually saying. So you do like, for example, I run into a lot of Lower West Side in that map too. And so like, that's why I have beef with that one in particular, because I run into it a lot.
Yeah. Like you'll never hear someone say New City, right? Is going to be Backyards or Canaryville. And the same with like Riverdale. Most people are referring to the South suburban village of Riverdale, not necessarily the community area of like All Gale Gardens.
Yes, exactly. One thing that I wanted to get into was like transit and transportation, because our producer Michelle Navarro, has been asking this question, which I think is a really good one, which is like, when you tell someone that you're going to get somewhere via CTA train, what do you tell them? And do you call it the L?
I think unless you're over the age of 50, if you say L, you're forcing it, and I don't believe it. But I just say pink line, red line, blue line, brown line, whatever.
I do say I just got off the L. But mostly it's I'm riding a bus, I'm getting on the metro, or I'm telling you the line I'm getting on, which that is interesting because like my older family members remember a time before, of course, it was the red, the blue. Like this is something that happened in 1993.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my family members still think of it as like the Skokie line or the Milwaukee line or the Howard Jackson Park Inglewood line. And so sometimes I will say a color and older family members won't necessarily know what I'm referring to because they haven't used the train as much. And, you know, we always make, I don't think it's jokes, but it's always thinking about like, why did they call it the red line since that has such a negative connotation? And you will still look up on CTA site to this day. And it's just like, well, it's just a bright color and it runs the longest route from north south. And it would just stand out on the map. Like maybe I should put a little more thought into that, but
wow, that's crazy. I never thought of that. Yeah, red line.
Oh, really? I think about that all the time, especially because it's like the north-south line, and
exactly.
Like it's just really you can really see it. It's interesting. I'm more likely to say, you know, if I'm taking a CTA train, I'm likely to say I'm taking the train, or if I'm taking a CTA bus, I'll say I'm taking the bus.
One thing thinking about neighborhoods again, when people try to give a neighborhood like a new trendy name, for example, I'm in the South Loop and right now I've heard variations of Sloop, of Solo, of people trying to make fetch happen. And I don't know, you know, like most of these neighborhood names only exist because people just start saying it a bunch. And so part of me is like, you are entitled to try to start something and maybe it'll have staying power in the long run.
Sloop. They've been trying to make Sloop happen for a while. Cause I remember that when I was in college too. People that like trying to be a thing.
I mean, I guess the question is like who is trying to make it happen, right? Because if it is just an organic, like the good people of the South Loop just decide they need to save much more time by abbreviating it, then that's fine. That's organic. But if it's a marketing thing,
well, it's definitely the younger people coming to sort of take South Loop, because I live in a building with a lot of older homeowners who are like, my South Loop ain't what it used to be. I like when it was quiet.
Well, that's the thing. I was going to say, Rick, to your point earlier, I do think there's a lot of real estate interest in this as well. Because, right, South Loop, in addition, right, has been built up residentially quite a lot, right? There's been a real push to get people to move to South Loop and all those big high rises and stuff with the luxury apartments. And so, you know, I do think there's sort of that element. And like the Solo actual Sloop, I don't know where that came from. I think it's awful. It sounds like AI slop. I don't know what, I don't get it. Solo, I kind of get because it's like a take on Soho, right? And
that's where you go. That's where
which
you go.
Which is not in Chicago. What do you?
I understand. But I get the instinct. I get where the like where it's kind of coming from, and I think it could also like maybe expand. Could West Loop become Wheelo? I don't know. I think it's a possibility. I mean, again, I don't think they're going to make fetch happen, but.
I feel like I say this every other podcast I'm on, but keep that stuff in Denver where it belongs, right? We are a real city. We need to continue to act like it, okay?
I don't know. We have K-Town for all the K streets.
Well,
K-Town was...
A real estate developer did not come up with K-Town. I can tell you that right now.
But K-Town, I think K-Town sounds cuter. If you don't know, K-Town refers to a bunch of streets grouped together that have names beginning with K, and a historically underinvested part of the city on the west side, right? I also don't quite understand where the boundaries of K-Town are.
Yeah, I was like, it really depends where you are in the city.
Because on the northwest side, I think it's like, it's felt a little differently, but but yeah, it's interesting because I think like in other cities there are neighborhoods called K-Town and it refers to Koreatown. And when I learned that was not the case in Chicago, I was like, oh, okay. That like took me a second.
I think it's mostly in the North Lawndale part of the city because that's the K-Town historic district in the city. How many of the K streets can you name?
Oh, Kettvale, Keeler, Keystone.
There's one that ends in OV.
Karlov.
Okay.
Kaminsky, Kostner. But yes, the K streets in largely North Lawndale. Though I imagine at this point, depending on how, populations have moved around the city, different parts of the city have probably referred to their area as K-Town as well.
Rick, you had a good one about our expressways, which is already a weird term that no one else uses outside of Chicago, is expressway.
So that's the thing. Like, I will pull back my own personal curtain, which I hate to do, and admit live on air that I was not born in Chicago. However, my dad grew up in Jefferson Park, so we spent holidays coming here all the time. And when I moved here in 2011, I memorized the expressways. I committed Dan Ryan, Kennedy, Stevenson, Eisenhower, Edens to memory, just because I assumed somebody at some point would press me on that, right? Which never ended up happening. And to my knowledge, people here more often than not just say like 290
or
whatever.
Interesting.
I mean, you'll hear the phrase expressway over highway, but I feel like people, at least in my day-to-day, are more likely to say like, oh, I'm just going to hop on 90 or whatever, rather than
my experience. My experience has been very different, actually. I do think the number one thing you'll say if they're taking number one, where I come from, we say freeway. So if they're taking what I call a freeway, they will say, I'm getting on the expressway, which was very confusing to me because I assumed expressway meant express lanes, and it only does sometimes, but most of the time it doesn't. Our director of growth marketing, Caroline Patton, who also lives here in Chicago, said that she got made fun of for saying interstate instead of highway or expressway. So usually that's what people say is I'm taking the expressway. When I was a baby reporter, I was working on the Sun-Times wire desk. And so I was like listening to police scanners and I was, listening to traffic reports and things like that. And on all of that kind of radio information, they would use the name of the expressway, the Dan Ryan, the Kennedy, the Stevenson, et cetera. And like I could not figure it out for the life of me. I could not visualize it in my head at all. The other thing that always used to confuse me is that you don't use eastbound, westbound, northbound, southbound. You use inbound and outbound. That's it.
Right,
you don't say you don't give the cardinal direction.
I only say the numbers. Dan Ryan is the only one that I say because it's like that's off the Dan Ryan. The Herald's off the Dan Ryan, or but I'm only referring to 87th Street when I say the Dan Ryan. Everything else, I'm only saying the numbers.
Another piece of, so this shows up when you search like lists of Chicago slang. Mm-hmm. This one shows up a lot. And I kind of don't agree that this is slang, actually. And that's the word clout.
I mean, I certainly know just in, reading a lot about the dailies and like Mike Royko specifically, he, the famous editorial columnist, had this big article back in probably the 70s or something about how clout was very much a Chicago thing, and he felt it weird and distasteful that coastals were starting to use the phrase clout. So effectively, I don't know how that shakes out anymore.
I was shocked that the word was that young. That is what the Encyclopedia of Chicago says. It looks like the first mention is in 1937, so a little earlier, right? That no one could get anywhere without clout from behind. And apparently the term comes from like an old baseball expression where people, when there was a big hit, they would say, what a clout.
Interesting.
But yeah, the word is not that new and only gained popularity as you sort of say when we get into this. But again, like to call it a slang term feels kind of diminutive to me. Like to me, it's just a,
I agree.
It's just a word that happens to have roots here,
What's interesting is I think back in like 2018, 2019, like Genius, for example, which is a largely hip hop and rap based like music platform, really kind of attributed the rise of clout, particularly around music, social media influence, to Chicago. Even though they said you could start seeing it pop up in like Too Short and Rob bass songs back in '88, and Tupac used it in the '90s, and it obviously had a political life in Chicago throughout the '30s and '40s, but like its reemergence in the last 7 or 8 years is like, at least in the ways I have kind of come to associate it, it's really been around like not only rappers in Chicago, young people in Chicago, but just this current rise of social media influencers and content creators, for sure.
But the meaning hasn't exactly changed in that context. Like, the meaning is still kind of the same. It's wielding influence and power and having, a lot of sway in your lane, right? Like, I don't know. It's just it's interesting to me that, and I'm trying to figure out for whom this word is like an unfamiliar word, and I don't think it is for most people.
I think the pursuit of clout chasing is the way I'm hearing you use more often than not, even less than just like, oh,
Definitely.
that person has clout. It's more about the pursuit of popularity, and you're just like similar to like cringy. It's just like another way people describe the pursuit for social media fame.
Yeah. If you're an influencer trying to talk about slashies on Instagram, you are in search of clout.
You're clout chasing. And we are out here at CityCast Chicago. I'm not afraid to admit it.
Hey, no clean hands in a dirty world.
Some of my favorite Chicago slang, for example, there's this conversation on TikTok when every few months, where people are saying the rise of Chicago influence is mostly being dictated by either transplants or people who didn't grow up, didn't necessarily spend a lot of time either growing up in the city or even a lot of time outside. And there are like a few words that they say if someone's overusing this, like G, for example. This is a word I use all the time and have been using all the time, in the same way calling somebody Joe or Charlie. Like, these are just things I grew up. But when you start to see it in somebody's script a lot more, or they're overusing words like goofy, there are a few words that are clear markers of the minute a person in the video is like, gee, I just saw this goofy down the street at the Jewels. If that's the phrase and that's where the story starts, people are like, I knew this was somebody from Chicago. Or, yep, this is a Chicago story. But if somebody is like maybe trying to say, these are my favorite restaurants in the city, and they're overusing the word, people are like, okay, I see what you're doing here. There are a few words that clearly say that is Chicago. And I'm glad that my favorites like G and Goofy have become those for the larger audience who mostly consume Chicago through social media.
Goofy is one of my favorite slang words that I deeply want to adopt, but does not sound right when I say it.
You just gotta tell somebody to get your goof ass out of here.
It's fine. It just is what it is. One that I think is interesting that I feel like a lot of people say is very Chicago, but I read as more broader to the Great Lakes, is jagoff.
I only hear that when I go to the Bears game at this point. I never hear that used in casual conversation, but that's similar to like the Chicago SNL accent. I hear it, but it's only in very few places. And the Bears game last weekend, people got a couple jagoffs off, and it was authentic.
I think a lot of that still, it almost exists more in the suburbs at this point than the city, because there's less, just watering down from transplants, who kind of dilute the vowel shift, and jagoff. I think it'd be very weird and forced if any of my friends use jagoff in casual conversation.
I love it when I hear it. When I hear like a legitimate one, it's just, that's another one though you'll see on a lot of lists of Chicago slang that I'm always like, but is it though? Like, is it though, really?
Two of my other favorites that pop up in casual conversation is how we use, and we've had to explain this to people who have maybe been on the show or something, but like the way we use like lil and whole, like we'll say, oh, we're having a little conversation. It's like, well, that's not reference to like how important we think it is, or I'm going to go to this little party. And I'm not necessarily saying it's boring or it's not going to be a lot of people there. In the same way, if I was like,
I'm not one of your little friends.
Right. or I was going to use whole as like but there's a whole ass snowstorm happening right now. I got to go to my whole. You know what I'm saying? It's the way we use those words, sometimes interchangeably, but at times it can feel as if like whole, it can be used very dramatically, and little sometimes feels like we're being dismissive. But in both cases, I don't think necessarily either are true. It's just.
So this is an interesting one because I thought this was a personal tick of mine. And then Michelle brought it up as like something that she says. And when she was living in New York, people used to kind of like look at her sideways because they thought that she was like being disrespectful when she would say like a little something or whatever. And she kind of had to be like, no, that's not what I mean at all. And so now I am wondering if this comes from my time living in Chicago, because I do that all the time. It's just like, oh yeah, we're just gonna have a little get together, or like, yeah, we're gonna do this little story. Like, it's cool. Like, we're gonna have a little conversation. And I've even had it like edited out of my work. I've had editors where I write a script and I have it somewhere. It's like, oh yeah, we're having a little, and they're like, no, you're having like a really important conversation. Like, this is a good story. And I'm like, that's not what I mean. I'm just like, I don't know. It's like, it's that Midwestern, I think it's that Midwestern kind of politeness and like we don't want to intrude on whatever else is going on. It's just, yeah, this is the thing that's happening, you know? I will say, so one other one that came up when we asked our friends in marketing was the concept of 2 flat, 3 flat. And I will say that like, that is not a thing that people say outside of Chicago, really. In number one, because they don't build this kind of housing outside of Chicago. So like, that's one thing that's going on. You don't see a lot of this type of thing, but like, you know, what we would call like a 3 flat in Chicago, in Seattle, we'd probably call a triplex. It's not quite a 1-to-1, but just like, and I think in Chicago, there's a very distinct difference of a duplex or a triplex is when you share side walls, and a flat or 2 flat or 3 flat is when you share floor ceilings. You know what I mean? And one of our digital marketing managers, Jermaine, he said in Cleveland, we'd call it a 2-family or a 3-family. So I do think there is a difference. And I think that's one of those things that Chicagoans don't even realize is unique to them.
Well, increasingly, they are 1 family.
Yes.
Exactly.
So I think that's part of it, you know.
True.
A lot of the deconversions taking that.
I just call it a whole ass apartment or a little 2 flat. It's just a little 2 flat.
2 flat or a whole ass apartment. Yeah.
Whole ass apartment or a little 2 flat. I want to give a huge thank you to our guest today, executive producer Simone Alisea.
Hey, thanks, Jacoby.
And our social media manager, Rick Homuth.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks.
What are your favorite pieces of Chicago slang or lingo? Let us know at 773-780-0246. Before we get out of here, you know we got some good news for you. This Wednesday at 6 p.m., join the DePaul Art Museum for the Young Lords Speak, Conversation, and Celebration, center on the enduring impact of the Young Lords organization, featuring original members, photographers, artists, and designers, exploring how a group of Puerto Rican youth in Chicago became one of the most influential community orgs of the 20th century. I'll drop a link for you in the show notes. As always, we appreciate you for listening, reading, heading over to membership.citycast.fm and signing up to become a CityCast Chicago neighbor. And as always, for being back here bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.